I'm here in front of the Louisiana State Capitol building, the tallest Capitol building in the good old US of A. And Louisiana loves that, because as you can tell, it's tall, and we're number one. And if there's something to be number one in, I think tallest Capitol building is definitely up there. And at least we have that, because we're ranked 47th in education, 45th in public health, 49th in economy, and 49th in happiness. But hey, we got a tall building. And recently, a new governor got put in charge of the stone bastion of democracy, one who's promised to fix these problems, to make Louisiana great again. Jeff Landry won his gubernatorial seat in 2023 after an embarrassing attempt at a campaign by the Louisiana Democratic Party, which saw Landry win outright in the first round of an open primary. Governor Landry is popular. He has power. And the only good thing about being at the bottom is you can only go up. So what has Landry done to make Louisiana great again? Well, the first thing he did was reject millions of dollars of USDA money that would have fed 600,000 school children. And then after that, he mandated that all public classrooms have a prominent display of the Ten Commandments. And of course, this was immediately met with lawsuits, but that was all by design. He even admitted it, saying that he can't wait to be sued, because he knew this law would never pass, and he doesn't care if it passes. This entire stunt is a manufactured fight against a non-existent enemy so Landry can run ads saying he's defending Christianity. And it's working. His base loves him, and this Ten Commandments controversy is a big reason why. If I had a nickel for every time a prominent Republican politician had a controversy involving the Bible in 2024, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's strange that it happened twice.
I'm proud to be partnering with my very good friend Lee Greenwood, who doesn't love his song, God Bless the USA, in connection with promoting the God Bless the USA Bible. This Bible is the King James Version and also includes our founding father documents, yes, the Constitution.
That's weird, right? That Trump is schlocking a Bible like it's some overpriced watch. To be fair, though, this isn't no ordinary Bible. No. This isn't just the inspired and literal words of God. You see, when you buy the God Bless the USA Bible, it comes printed with the handwritten chorus to God Bless the USA by Lee Greenwood, the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, and of course, the Pledge of Allegiance. And if you act now, for the low price of $1,000, you can even get Trump's autograph. Typically, people only autograph things they've worked on, so the symbolism of Trump signing a Bible is, it's there. But hey, at least it's not the Passion Translation. So why is Trump doing this anyway? Why is he selling a Bible? Well, the obvious answer is for money, right? But the thing is, he doesn't need the money. And I'm not even talking about these claims that he's a billionaire self-funding his own political campaign. He has other billionaires to do that for him. And he just got a job at McDonald's anyway, so he's pulling himself up by his bootstraps. Trump isn't doing this for money. He doesn't need the money. He's doing this for political gain. More and more, we see politicians making overt appeals to Christians by using Christian rhetoric. While this isn't a new phenomenon, there is a certain flavor of it that's finding success among a new generation of Christians. One that moves from shocking to weird very quickly.
Jesus is Lord, Christ is King.
And I said that many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country and to restore America to greatness.
You must be godly and you must have Jesus. But unless we get spiritual men in the White House to help turn this thing around, we're going to lose it. Our nightmare is just beginning.
Wait a second. Isn't that the Duck Dynasty guy? Well, turns out after 11 seasons of fame on the A&E channel, Phil Robertson was not ready to pack up the clout and return to the duck blind. Instead, he went on to produce a respectable media empire, including a podcast, a second TV show with conservative network Blaze TV, a biographical movie, and various speaking engagements. Also authoring several books, which this is just the stuff that he's in, okay? This entire family loves making content. And everything the Robertson family produces is centered around two things: family values and Jesus. I remember as a kid growing up in Louisiana, Duck Dynasty was huge. My 5th grade English teacher's classroom was decorated floor to ceiling in Duck Dynasty merchandise. And the reason we loved them wasn't just because they were from Louisiana, it's because they were unashamedly Christian. They talked about Christ. They prayed on TV. I mean, this was like the redneck version of the Duggars from 19 Kids and Counting. Look, I love trashy reality TV, okay? Don't judge me here. And unlike the Duggars, there's currently no accusations of weird sex stuff going on in the Robertson clan, so for that, they get a petty clap. And that's about the last nice thing I'm going to say about this man and his family, because if you take a look at what exactly Phil Robertson is proposing, it's disturbing. The book Jesus Politics, How to Win Back the Soul of America, is a self-described kingdom manifesto that sounds a radical call for Christians to use their freedoms and vote for biblical principles and reclaim the soul of America. And there's an interesting claim in that title that Robertson just kind of glosses over, that not only does America have a soul, but Christians need to fight to win it back. And I'm not going to be pedantic here and say that theologically America can't have a soul, okay? Obviously, that's not what he's saying. Plus, we all know that only humans and the Vatican's holy anime girl mascot can have souls, okay? That's pretty basic stuff. What's not basic stuff is the idea that we need to have a holy war in America because the evil ones convinced us that our freedoms weren't founded in God, but rather granted to allow us to chase our every desire. And if you don't believe in the devil, well, maybe you should, because Robertson thinks that not only school shooters, but also the guy who attempted to assassinate Ronald Reagan are literally possessed by demons, seemingly suggesting that if we just had state-mandated exorcists in schools, no more kids would die from gun violence. Of course, you have the typical family values like wives submitting to their husbands and that beating your children is good and not beating them is actually sinful. You know, normal stuff. And look, I could go on point for point explaining to you how crazy this ideology can be. Like how the EPA is demonic because global warming is a biblical guarantee. But I don't need to, because Phil Robertson never had a leg to argue from in the first place. America doesn't have a soul, so there's nothing they can win back. And even if America did have a soul, it's not based on the evangelical flavor of Christianity that Phil Robertson preaches.
I'm here on the banks of the Wichita River, the very same river that Phil Robertson says he had to fish to feed his family off of before Duck Commander. And while unlike most self-made men, I really do believe Phil Robertson when he says that he came from nothing. In fact, at one point, he was so broke, he says that he needed $600 in one day, or his bank was going to foreclose on the house. So what does he do? He gets down on his knees and he prays to God for a miracle. So he opens up his mailbox the next morning and he finds a check for $610 from a Japanese hunting company. And you know, whether or not that story's true, I don't think it matters. Because the fact that Phil Robertson tells it, I think it makes something very clear. You know, you can't separate Phil Robertson, the businessman, Phil Robertson, the Christian, and Phil Robertson, the political commentator. Because ultimately, he's using his faith as a tool for political gain. He's saying that if you want the life that I have, the success that I have, the family that I have, not only should you believe in God the way I do, but you should vote the way I do. You should support the causes that I do. This is White Ferry Road Church in West Monroe, Louisiana.
And I'm going to stop myself right there. As you can tell, I did travel to Phil Robertson's church, and the footage is, well, it's bad. Look, okay, I'm not a videographer, so I decided to do some voiceover so you might actually be able to understand what I'm saying. And instead of looking at me standing way too far away from the camera, you get to look at AI Phil Robertson preaching at White Ferry Road Church. Now, despite numerous calls and emails, no one from White Ferry Road responded for a comment request. So before anyone complains that I'm misrepresenting this church or its beliefs, know that I at least tried to give them their own voice. But go ahead and leave an angry comment anyway. It boosts the algorithm. So please and thank you. White Ferry Road is a non-denominational Protestant church, which officially means that it does not belong to a larger governing body of church communities like Presbyterian or Methodist. But, more often than not, a church being non-denominational means it's spiritual and evangelical. Worship services will have contemporary Christian rock music led by a zany youth pastor. Evangelicals focus on their personal relationship with God. They view the Bible as the only authority for God, and they don't really care about theological specifics of stuff like the Trinity or the Eucharist. This isn't a bad thing. I mean, does it really matter if Jesus was physically human with the divine spirit? Or at what point, if any, the host literally becomes the body of Christ? Not really. And in America, it especially doesn't, but we're going to get to that later. Evangelical is a very broad term and isn't restricted to non-denominational churches. The fastest growing Christian group in the world, the Pentecostals, are very evangelical, while the Southern Baptist Church is having an identity crisis over just how evangelical it is. The reason I'm taking the time to explain what a typical non-denominational church is like is because in order to understand courteous Christian nationalism, you really have to understand the spiritual lives these people live. You are made in the image of God. By accepting Jesus, you become born again and are filled with the Holy Spirit. It is your job to spread the gospel and fight against literal demons pulling the world away from salvation. Issues like gay marriage or abortion are not about human rights or constitutional interpretation. They're about God and the Bible. By not fighting back against them, you're turning your back on Jesus, on your salvation. And if Jesus can die on the cross for your sins, then surely you can withstand some secular social pressure for his cause. Phil Robertson is a Christian nationalist, and while he may not openly describe himself as one, it's just a fact. In Jesus politics, he repeatedly references the biblical prophecy that Daniel gave to the evil King Nebuchadnezzar about how the empires of the world will fall and be crushed by the rock on which Jesus built his church. He chose doing what's godly over following secular laws like gay marriage or divorce. And he asked his readers if they put their trust in American politics or Jesus politics. What he wants is a Christian nation, a country founded in, composed of, and fighting for what he believes Christianity is. And if it looks like a duck and quacks that health insurance is demonic, let's call him what he is, a Christian nationalist. Robertson is a very specific kind of Christian and a very specific kind of Christian nationalist. I want to make this abundantly clear that I am not suggesting Phil Robertson is a white supremacist or an anti-Semite, nor do I think he directly calls for violence through a Christly lens like that of Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. I want to make this clear for two very important reasons. First, it is just unfair to associate Robertson with the dangerous, violent, and racist rhetoric of white nationalism. And after consuming way too much Phil Robertson media, if there's one thing this man attempts nuance on, it's racial issues. These movements are fringe groups based on wild and loose theology like British Israelism or Christian identity ideology. They are fringe by design, and they will never reach mass appeal because they are dumb and racist. Which brings me to my second point. See, Robertson isn't a white supremacist, and he's not on the surface crazy. And that's by design, because what Robertson is preaching is courteous Christian nationalism. He's selling you a version of Christianity that requires your political obedience in exchange for salvation. A version of Christianity that is by no means the only or even a respected one. On their website, White Theory Road cites Matthew 16 for what they believe on how churches have authority in the world. Which is funny, because Phil Robertson cites Matthew 16 for outlining why secular laws shouldn't be followed. So what does it actually say? Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And when they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and others still Jeremiah or one of the prophets," he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered them, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And when I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Now this is one of the most important verses in the Bible. It's right up there with Exodus 3:14, John 3:16, or 1 Samuel 18:25. Look it up. So it's not weird for people to have different interpretations of what this verse means. Typically though, these differences are about the role of man in the church Jesus founded. The Catholics might say that this is Jesus naming Peter the first pope and the start of the line of apostolic succession, while White Theory Road might say that this is Jesus giving man the right to interpret his words. And whether one is more correct than the other doesn't matter, because it's very clear here that Jesus founded a church and not a nation. Christian nationalists want a Christian nation, not just a country of Christians or even one whose dominant culture is Christianity. They want a country that is founded in, guided by, and legally bound to the Bible. It's not that far of a stretch to say that they want the evangelical version of Afghanistan or Iran. And I want you to seriously ask yourself if you're okay with the uniform of the revolution being polos and khakis. Now we've already touched on how the idea of a Christian nation is theologically weird, but believe it or not, Christian theology is not concrete and it's up for interpretation, so we're going to move on from that. What is concrete and not up for interpretation is that America is not a Christian nation. It never was and never will be. Remember earlier how I said it especially doesn't matter in America what your theological beliefs are, but we were going to talk about that later? Well, it's later, and from the beginning of white people occupying this land we call America, we've cared a lot about personal theological beliefs. Everyone knows the story of the Pilgrims and the Mayflower, and how they were super cool with each other and ate turkey and just vibed so hard that nothing bad ever happened again. And while it's a creative interpretation of history, it leaves out a lot of what happened before the Plymouth Colony. Like, did you know the Pilgrims were kicking it in Holland before coming to America? And sometimes the story will mention that they left England because of religious persecution, but what does that really mean? While I don't have time to fully explain pre-modern notions of religion, understand that until very recently, what someone's religion was A, not their choice, and B, of literal life and death importance. Believing in God was not an option in the same way that believing in America is not an option. While technically, personally, you can believe America is not a real country, it's not going to get you out of that traffic ticket, so good luck with that. If you were born in Europe in the 1600s and your mom wasn't Jewish, you were Christian. And depending on where you were born, you were either Catholic or some flavor of Protestant. This wasn't a choice, It had nothing to do with what you personally believed, and they took it so seriously you could get fined for not going to church. Which is what happened to the Pilgrims when they wanted to have their own congregations outside the Church of England, forcing them to leave England for Holland, but once that became too expensive, they found their way to the New World, and the rest is history. The religious persecution the Pilgrims faced was not based in theology, it was based in nationality. And look, that is a massive oversimplification of the story, but I want to highlight it because unlike who was considered a person in the 1600s, the question of religious and national identity is not black and white. Now, eventually the good old USA was founded, and the spirit of individual religion is at the heart of its founding. There's a reason that the first sentence of the First Amendment is about not establishing a national religion. You take any international politics course and you will hear about the Peace of Westphalia, which was signed at the end of the 30 Years' War. It was the start of the modern nation state and the end of the national religion. And in 1790, George Washington wrote a letter to the Jewish population of Newport, Rhode Island, in which he made it very clear that they are not only citizens of America, but it's because they have the rights of a citizen that their personal religion will be respected. And this is something that we should be proud of. He said that the citizens of the United States of America have a right to applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy, a policy worthy of imitation. All possess alike the liberty of consciousness and the humanities of citizenship. John Adams, the guy Phil Robertson is quoted as saying,
You must be godly and you must have Jesus.
Signed the Treaty of Tripoli in 1797, which says in part that the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. And at one point, Thomas Jefferson wrote his own version of the New Testament that just denied Jesus was God. So it's pretty safe to say that our founding fathers weren't Christian kind. So this mythic past of a country founded by super religious and pious Christians, it's just that. It's a myth. It never existed, and anyone trying to tell you it did has an agenda and political power to grow. Which brings us back to Jeff Landry, the Trump Bible, and Phil Robertson. Because ultimately, all of these things are connected. Appealing to a fake religious history to mobilize a modern nationalist movement is good politics. Old white people are the most likely to be religious, and old white people are the most likely to vote. Do Jeff Landry and Donald Trump really care about God all that much? Probably not. But they care about the votes. Does Phil Robertson really care about the GOP, or does he just see it as a means to an American Iran? It's like a messed up tomato and okra gumbo of hatred. Phil loves to tell this story about how he was a bad boy before he found Christ, how he was cheating on his wife, doing drugs and getting drunk, and how even his own brothers tried telling his wife to divorce him. But then he found Christ and it all worked out. And that's great for Phil, that really is, but that's not the typical story. How many women end up locked in abusive relationships because they financially, socially, or spiritually can't divorce their husbands? How many children become victims of abuse? How many innocent people die because they feel as though they can't leave these bad situations? In the future Phil Robertson dreams of, divorce is not godly, so it won't be allowed. Don't let his accent or the beard fool you. He is a smart man, and he understands full well what he is fighting for. There is some good news at the end of all of this, though. Christian nationalism might be widespread, but it's also very thin. There is no real leader championing the cause of courteous Christian nationalism because it just can't exist. Any extreme right-wing movement that has aspirations of overthrowing the government and causing a revolution, well, they're based in racial or anti-Semitic ideals that these good Christian folk just won't get behind. In their minds, blacks might be lazy or entitled, but they're still children of God. And that's not to mention the Israel of it all, and all of a sudden it starts to make sense why this movement is an ocean wide and a kiddie pool deep. There are too many different contention points, and if there's one thing Americans love more than guns, it's arguing. So if you're watching this and you're worried that a Handmaid's Tale style takeover is imminent, breathe and relax. Our religious landscape is by design not built for that. However, with the re-election of Donald Trump, many people have been inspired and empowered to form groups to make bold moves. So if you're a Christian watching this and see your church moving towards political action, seriously think and pray if these actions are what Christ would want, or if you and your community are being used. It is okay to be scared about the future of our country and the world, but it is not okay to let that fear consume you and make you bitter towards the rest of humanity. Good things aren't easy, and it's always harder to create goodness than to let evil be. So remember, you are what you are, and no matter what, you can always destroy hatred with love.